Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. A counselor's effectiveness depends significantly on the ability to make good judgment calls. I've found these dilemmas important and frequently occurring. First, should you work with this client? Even if you're working in an organization rather than in private practice, you should retain some discretion over whether you should accept a client. Even if you're desperate for clients, do remember that a life is hanging in the balance. And from a more pragmatic perspective, a client who's deeply dissatisfied with you can cause you more trouble than he or she is worth. Just ask yourself, do I believe I have a reasonable chance of helping this client enough to justify, his or her time and perhaps money? Also ask yourself that before deciding whether to invite the client to make an appointment for another session. Your suggestion could range from, hey, we're doing well, would you like to make another appointment? To, I'm not sure we're a good fit. Why don't you go home and think about whether you would do better with someone else? The next dilemma is speed versus thoroughness. The effective counselor recognizes that one approach does not fit all. Within the bounds of what you think would be helpful, consider whether that client would end up most benefiting and satisfied with a quick, action-oriented approach, as is common in cognitive behavioral therapy, or would the client be better off with a thorough exploration of what's made the client who he or she is today as preliminary to working on action steps? The next dilemma, how directive to be. You're going to want to spend much session time in listener, facilitator mode with certain types of clients. Ideationally fluent ones, that is, they readily come up with solutions to their problems. Clients who are defensive, likely to yes but and feel antipathic to your suggestions. Clients when you have a limited domain expertise compared with the client. For example, your career counseling client's a data scientist. Or if the client explicitly or implicitly makes clear that they want you primarily as a sounding board. You may want to be more directive with other clients, notably those who aren't ideationally fluent. Those who not only ask, but you sense really want your suggestions. Of course, offer suggestions tentatively and tactfully. For example, I'm wondering if X might work. What do you think? When you have more expertise regarding the client's problem than she has, that's also a good time to be more directive. Should you interrupt? Clients vary in their desire and tolerance for being interrupted. For example, a long-winded discursive client may welcome you reining them in and getting them back on topic, while other clients should rarely be interrupted. For example, those you sense are developing their thoughts as they speak. Also, there are cultural considerations. In some cultures, New York and Israeli Jews come to mind, interrupting is not only accepted, but appreciated as core to an efficient, dynamic conversation. In most other cultures, however, interrupting is seen as rude. That said, even in such a culture, you may decide in a given situation that the benefit of interrupting is worth it. As I said, these are judgment calls. Next dilemma, when a client wants to revisit past trauma. It's sometimes helpful to revisit even well-trod territory regarding a person's traumas, from an abusive parent to a firing that the client perceived as unfair. But sometimes the client believes that he or she is ready to take steps forward. Sometimes the counselor can decide whether to revisit simply by asking the client, for example, you think it would be more helpful for us to revisit that past trauma, or do you believe you're ready to identify and then take baby steps forward? The next dilemma, how much to deviate from what I call probabilism, that is probabilistic thinking. Everyone, even end-stage cancer patients, want hope. So usually it may be wise for the counselor to err modestly toward optimism. Of course, that doesn't mean encouraging long-shot dreams, like a lackluster person who wants to try to get rich by becoming the next Oprah, without at least a discussion of the probability of even partial success relative to the opportunity cost, that is, what the client could have been doing with the time and money. But occasionally, the counselor would be wise to lead a clear-eyed discussion of the probabilities. That's especially the case when the liabilities of pursuing a goal are great. I recall a client who, at age 47, quit a job that he liked as a professor so he could become an Orthodox rabbi. With the job market poor for rabbis, and the required training being 6 expensive years, I felt that encouraging probabilistic thinking was the right approach. In fact, however, he ignored the probabilities and is applying the rabbinical school. Next dilemma, how enthusiastic to be. I have an unproven theory that there is a relatively fixed amount of energy when discussing an idea with a client. The more enthusiasm displayed by the counselor, the less that's left for the client. It makes the client feel less ownership in the idea. So normally I default to neutrality or mild enthusiasm. On the other hand, if a client is despondent, an extra dollop of enthusiasm might be needed to give the client the aforementioned important hope. Next dilemma, should you confront? Confrontation is generally the nuclear option. It risks destroying the client's self-esteem and their trust in you. Yet confrontation should remain in the toolkit of the advanced practitioner. There are instances with some clients in which, quote, support, non-judgmental listening, and so on, have yielded only reinforcement of undue complacency, self-absorption, and the like. A common example is the client who blames everything on external factors and taking little or no responsibility for their failures. It can be especially ticklish if they blame their failures on today's hot-button factors, race, ethnicity, and gender. One way to mitigate at least some of the risk is to say something like, are you willing to try a little game? They usually agree, at which point I've said something like, instead of being your mild-mannered career counselor, I'm going to turn into a dictator. No nicey-nicey counselor talk, straight talk, okay? If they say yes, I confront them with what I think they need to hear, straight up. I do so in a completely different tone, aggressive. After I've said it, I revert back to my counselor voice and say, of course that wasn't really me. What would you say to the dictator? Usually the client says the dictator's right, and that moves us into a more fair-minded discussion of what next step should be. And the final dilemma is, when saying goodbye, should you shake hands, hug, wave, or just say goodbye? It's generally safest to shake hands, wave, or just say goodbye, unless the client says, can I give you a hug? Or at least extends their arms. When it is probably safe to give a 2-second hug in which only shoulders touch, no breasts, no pelvis. While this is probably true across genders, in today's Me Too era, it may be especially true for a male counselor and female client. That said, there is the rare situation, usually after multiple sessions, by which time trust has been established, when especially after a challenging or unusually rewarding session, even a man might initiate said brief, clearly not sexual hug. Of course, different counselors in different situations may well make different decisions or identify different key dilemmas. But these are some of the dilemmas I try to stay conscious of that I do believe help me make me more effective. In any event, I thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko. Feel free to give this a thumbs up or a thumbs down, if appropriate. Your comment, share, or subscribe to my channel. Again, I thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.